Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you come in. Welcome to the Children's Sermon. I'm Pastor Nate. You knew that already. We are continuing with our journey through the Jesus Storybook Bible. Today's story is one called Let's Go. And it's based on a number of different passages from Matthew 4 and Mark 1 and Luke 4 through 6. Basically, it's telling about the very beginning of Jesus' ministry, and in particular, when he calls his disciples. So let's listen to the story, and then we'll come back here for work time in just a second. See you soon. Let's go. After Jesus was baptized, he went straight out into the desert. That might seem like an odd place to go because, as you know, deserts are very hot, and there isn't any food or water or places to stay. But Jesus needed to get away by himself and be somewhere quiet and lonely. He needed to be with his heavenly Father to get ready for his new life. In the desert, Jesus thought about the secret rescue plan he had made with God before the foundation of the world. They both knew what would have to happen. To rescue God's children, Jesus would have to die. There was no other way. It was the reason he had come. Now, that old enemy, the one who had spoken through the snake to Adam and Eve back in the garden, remember him? He didn't want Jesus to rescue God's people. So he lied to Jesus. "Are you really God's own son?" he whispered. "Poor you. God must not love you. You don't need to die. Do it my way." "Yes, and no," Jesus said to the liar. "I will do what God says." And from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same. Jesus wasn't like Adam. Jesus was a new kind of man. He would not believe the terrible lie that the enemy spoke. Jesus knew God loved him, and he would trust God, no matter what. It was just as God had promised to Adam and Eve all those years before. Jesus had come to do battle against the snake's work. He would get rid of the sin and the darkness and the tears, and he would suffer, but he would win. Jesus left the desert and set about the great rescue. He was going to get God's people back. But first, he needed to find some helpers and friends. He had a lot to do. He would need some people to help him. Who would make good helpers, do you think? Clever ones? Rich ones? Strong, important ones? Some people might think so, but I'm sure by now you don't need me to tell you they'd be wrong. Because the people God uses don't have to know a lot of things, or have a lot of things. They just have to need him a lot. One day, Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee when he saw some brothers and friends mending their nets. They were poor fishermen. Jesus called out to them, "Let's go." Peter, Andrew, James, and John looked up at this man on the shore, and they couldn't explain it. Their boats needed to be put away. Their nets needed mending. Fish were still wriggling on the shore. But something about this stranger made them just drop their nets and their fish and leave their boats and everything and follow him. This God-man was like no one they had ever met. When they looked at Jesus, their hearts filled up with a wonderful, forever sort of happiness, and inside it was as if they were running free in an open field. Jesus asked 12 men to be his helpers: Peter, Andrew, James, and John, Matthew, Philip, Bartholomew, Thomas, another James, Simon, Thaddeus, and Judas. Meeting Jesus would change all of them forever. I wonder, why are there interstates in Hawaii? I wonder, why do we drive on a parkway and park on a driveway? Why are apartments not apart? They're all together. Why is it called a boxing ring when it's a square? I wonder why, when we say fat chance and slim chance, it means the same thing. How come when we send something in a car, it's called a shipment, but when we send something on a ship, it's called cargo? I wonder. So in the Jesus Storybook Bible story that we heard, there's a lot going on, but I want to focus on how Jesus calls his disciples. And the story does a great job of talking about how, right, you would assume that Jesus would call rich people or powerful people or really smart people, but that's not how God works, is it? We learn that God works through very unusual ways, ways that we don't expect. And so you saw my silly wonderings over staring out longingly at the window about all the funny things in our world. But that's just a reminder, there's a lot of little things in our world that don't make sense. And frankly, a lot of the time, that's how God works. God works in ways that we wouldn't expect or that we wouldn't understand at first. And so your work for this week, the way to put your faith into practice, as we always talk about, is, I have a challenge for you, is to find some sort of item. It can be anything you want. Something just totally random that doesn't seem like it connects to God or your faith at all. But then find a way that it does. So just take something random. Oh, this coffee mug reminds me of God because God is always filling me up. It's just an example. But what can you come up with? Find a random object that doesn't seem like it would connect to God, and then tell a story about how it actually does tell the world about God. I'm Pastor Nate. This has been your children's sermon for the week. Thanks so much for watching. Share with your friends. Bye.